It's a bull market, so like let's get excited about the innovation here.
It's not the virtual machine that is going to limit the performance of a chain. It's actually the hot state.
What else is there to do before we kind of unchain the base Rollup ecosystem and allow it to really thrive?
The next 18 months are going to be, excuse my French, but fucking wild.
Gigagas.
I'm so excited.
Welcome back to the Rollup, your home for technical talks and open conversations that shape the modular future. Nothing on today's show is to be construed as financial advice. You can see our full disclosures list at therollup.co/ventures. Sit back, relax, and enjoy today's episode after a quick word from some of our awesome partners.
Safe is moving the world's GDP on-chain. With the introduction of SafeNet, Safe is taking this to the next step very soon. Check out net.safe.global to learn more about how Safe is moving the world's GDP on-chain.
All right. Devcon, Thailand. We rode here on grab bikes. We took the base roll-ups. We didn't get stuck on mainnet, like we were talking about with Anthony. So got a fast start to this podcast.
Embrace the Gigagas.
Yeah. Sam, it's your first time on the Rollup. You are the CEO of Rise, previously background in all sorts of different tech companies and software, big computer guy, graduated from the Australian National University. Big Aussie.
Yeah. Man, that's a deep cut. Nice.
Yeah.
So you've done your background.
Welcome in. Yeah, man. How are you doing today?
Thanks for having me on, fellas. It's hot here in Thailand. You dragged me out to some back alley, and I thought I was going to get robbed. This was like the Rollup's big capitalization on your growth to try and kidnap half of Ethereum. But no, we came out all right. This spot's good. Yeah, feeling good, man. It's been a long time since a green price correlated with a conference.
Yeah, it's always the opposite.
Yeah, it's like conferences have been bearish for like 18 months now, but the vibe here it's like people are excited. People are excited. It's happening again.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, we were just talking with Sasal how the ETH narrative has been so much infighting about L2s being parasitic and should we scale the L1 and fragmentation, and then like within like 130% candle over 5 days, it's like the Ethereum is now back on its like significantly in the number 2 rank, where it felt like it was losing some ground to Solana or other L1s. It's like now it's like, yeah, okay, let's just put that to rest for a bit.
Yeah. All narratives are a good narrative in the bull market. So things the bubble to the top quite quickly. But I think that's one of the things that Ethereum really struggled with the past really 18 months is that we've kind of got this ecosystem of competitors that spend more time arguing about like which has the best roll-up stack, or like the kind of infighting within the ETH ecosystem, whereas Solana is just like this unified front. And I think with a few big green candles, that's going to change.
Yeah, and I also think like the tech side of standards, of chain abstraction, of interop is getting there to kind of rebundle this unbundling of this modular expansion, if you will, of Ethereum and of just this broader ecosystem. And one part of this is base rollups, which I think we ought to do a primer for what base rollups are before we jump in, because I mean I think our community is probably familiar, but with regards to actually like the key properties that base rollups bring, what they are, and kind of why they're more Ethereum aligned from an economic perspective than kind of single sequencer rollups. I think it would be great to just understand your perspective.
Yeah, rather than just digging into what a base rollup is, I'll give the rundown of why base rollups are exciting. So today in the landscape of Ethereum, we've kind of evolved in this point where we have these fiefdoms. So the Arbitrum stack, Optimism ecosystem, then there's other shared sequences like Astra and Espresso, and they're like these clusters, but there's like big walls between them where there's no future plans for interop or anything like that. So you have new rollups coming to the market, either be it app chains or universal rollups that are looking at this landscape and trying to decide where to deploy their stack. And the current status is you deploy a centralized sequencer, and with the premise that you will eventually get rid of the training wheels and go decentralized, because censorship resistance and liveliness is super, super important. So they're looking, new rollups coming to the market are looking at this space, trying to work out where are they going to invest their time, and you kind of have to pick winners. and like build these allegiances is a strong word, but I think that's really where the based ecosystem offers a massive opportunity. Is that rather than offloading like value or like having to pick a winner, you've already picked Ethereum. Ethereum is already the best. Has the best and most decentralized validator network in the world, over 1 million validators. So with the based architecture, you can actually leverage this ecosystem of validators to sequence your blocks for you. So just on a standalone rollup basis, that's awesome. You don't have to build another layer on top of Ethereum. You don't have to build your own consensus layer. You can use Ethereum validators and the Ethereum infrastructure. And then from that point, you then, once more rollups come into the based ecosystem, we don't have to do BD to get other rollups to come in. It just makes sense for them. We then get interoperability between all of these rollups. So what I'm laying out here is kind of a future where the based sequencer is essentially the biggest sequencer in Ethereum, and that there is no vendor lock-in. It's completely credibly neutral. Anyone can participate, but you also get the same great benefits you get from shared sequencing, i.e. Synchronous interop.
Yeah, so I think that, I grasped this idea, and I think our community is kind of getting to this idea of like base rollups being the next frontier of scaling Ethereum for all this property. And I think namely composability brings that level of, if you have different base rollups using a similar pre-confirmation service or the same one, you get this kind of really intrinsic interoperability between them and the L1. But on the flip side of that, and I recently put out this tweet kind of like picking on Tycho a bit, which was like, I think it was like Tycho paid almost $700,000 to basically rent on to Ethereum L1 over the last month. And the picking was like, is Ethereum alignment really worth it? And so like, without getting too deep into like Tycho specific design, like how do you kind of conceptualize the mental model of like the costs of running a base rollup today before these kind of pre-comp services are out versus the like the benefits that you get?
Yeah, I know the tweet well, and I think it's good to ask these questions, to like be realistic about it. I want to make it very clear that the benefits of base sequencing isn't Ethereum alignment. That's just a nice to have. There's other core reasons why it makes sense. And using the Tycho use case, I think my comment to this tweet was something along the lines of, they're not paying for Ethereum alignment, they're paying to be first. So what I mean by that is that Tycho's prioritized speed to market and also security, and as a result, they haven't prioritized cost. So the team at Tycho, a great team. I spent a lot of time with Breck last week. Really smart dude, but ultimately they've done a kind of V1 implementation that is very inefficient. And one of the cool things about the based ecosystem is that the more rollups that join it, the cheaper it gets, because you get things like sharing blob transactions and things like that. So an analogy I like to think of why I'm extremely bullish about base sequencing is the best partnerships in business history are partnerships that have a symbiotic relationship where the two parties just benefit from working with each other. And a great example of this is the Bank AmeriCard. It was a Visa-like card that Bank of America issued back in the day. And they just really struggled with adoption. They couldn't get other banks to participate. So they changed the script, and they shifted things up and created Visa, but allowed all of the big banks to get involved and participate. And from there, Visa kind of just blew up to what it is today. And the reason that works is because there is a symbiotic relationship. Banks benefit for issuing Visa cards because they get all the interchange fees. And then Visa obviously benefits from having more adoption of their networks. And that's really, that analogy works really well for base sequencing, is that Ethereum benefits from base sequencers using Ethereum's validator set because it adds more value to the validators themselves. And base sequencers base rollups benefit from the ecosystem because it's a unified ecosystem. As more rollups come to the ecosystem, the stronger the network effects are, unlike these kind of dampened network effects we see with the fiefdoms today. So, and that leads to another thing that's really interesting about the based ecosystem, is that all the teams are quite encouraging and eager to help one another grow.
Well, it's still so early.
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
what? There's a handful of teams, right? There's like 6 or 7, maybe.
Yeah, and we're all pretty close. We all like talk a bit of smack on Twitter. Like there's a little bit of rivalry. I know M Team likes to talk a bit of trash.
Dude,
but
that guy is unfiltered.
yeah, he's got the yap.
But it feels like the Arbitrum optimism early days. Like it's like this like early, just a couple of teams building in the space. It really feels like a rewind to like 2020, 2021.
Yeah, it's exciting, and the fact that it is such a small community, everyone knows everyone. It feels like that. Those early days, I'd even speak to like the early Phantom ecosystem, or even like the Chainlinks ecosystem in the early days. Just like all like I anticipate similar growth.
And everyone kind of needs each other in the based ecosystem. Because, I mean, the example from Tycho, like as more base rollups come online, it'll become cheaper for those based rollups to share blob space and kind of...
Amortize?
Amortize. That was the word I was thinking about. Yeah, amortize fees across each of those rollups. Thank you. But then there's also this idea of like... So that's a decrease in the net cost, but then you have a net increase in the composability gains that you get as more base rollups come online. And I think that is another I guess pushback or contrast to the based thesis is right now you have these other rollup clusters that are centralized sequencers, and what is the and this is also part of the app chain thesis as well. It's like, what is the incentive for these rollups to go be based when they can earn potentially more from going on centralized sequencers? And there is sort of this theoretical future-looking value once there is a critical mass of based rollups that has some composability benefits that you can't get from some of these other rollup clusters. Thinking about like that is going to be possible, or it'll incentivize rollups beyond what is possible on centralized sequencers unce we kind of reach that critical mass of rollups. And so until we get there, everyone kind of needs each other. It doesn't make sense to be unfriendly or combative because as more come on, it lowers the net cost as well as increase the benefit from composability.
Yeah, absolutely, and it's really critical. All of the teams that are working on now, like they're putting in the effort to get to this point, and it wouldn't be possible without the teams coming together. Actually, Justin Drake's played a big role in this. He kind of kicked off this initiative back in February, and when people kind of just laughed at base sequencing is not really viable, and over the months and months it's really progressed, and the teams have now come together. Like we just spent a week in Chiang Mai.
Yeah, tell us about that.
Yeah, it was awesome. So Justin Drake and a few others within the pre-conf circle organised this event where there was a lot of the pre-conf teams, a few relays, builders, and like Tycho ourselves, Spire and Puffer. So like some of the big base teams all came together and essentially just like listed out the biggest challenges in both pre-confirmations and base sequencing, and each of us split up and like created teams to work on some of these projects. So the project I worked on was a open API specification for pre-confirmation. So broadly pre-confirmations for L1 or L2.
Yep.
And so it was Lubin, ETHGas, and Chainbound with Bolt all coming together and collaborating on a spec. And to Bolt's credit, they had a really good starting point that we started from. But we literally huddled in a hotel room with 15 other people, like 15 people in this hotel room with a laptop on the computer, and went through the spec line by line and just like riffed on the design choices. And we came out at the end of the day, after 3 days of doing this, we've got a spec that's relatively ready for public comment, doing some tweaks on some of the details. But ultimately, this means that we're going to have an open pre-confirmation spec, which the benefit of that is that we don't get these siloed pre-confirmation protocols, that they can essentially collaborate on the BD of validators. So as validators adopt it, it's pretty like seamless with what pre-confirmation providers they use essentially. So that adoption problem solved. But it also means that relays and builders just have to integrate with one standard.
Yep.
They don't need to integrate with Bolt, then ETHGas, then Lubin. It's like all open.
And that was one of my biggest like pushbacks to M Team on one of our live streams that we had, and he took a big hot poop on my head. But I mean, at the end of the day, I'm glad that that problem is like been identified and now worked on. I also saw that you put a thread out with regards to kind of like your key takeaways from the broader week. I'm not sure if this in particular was one of them, but could you maybe elaborate on those takeaways as well for the community? Like, what were the biggest takeaways from that week, and like the overall progress?
Yeah, so biggest takeaways were, I don't want to be like too positive given the candles are up, but
No, it's totally right.
I think getting together with these teams and like having face-to-face catch-ups and trying to solve problems together. My takeaway was that like these teams are ready to work together and build this out.
That's awesome.
Whereas in comparison, if you came in just looking at Twitter, it looks like we're all just like no one's working together. It's all completely independent, which it is to some degree. So it's really important to have these kind of events. The other thing is there are some tough problems in the based ecosystem that are going to need to be solved, like this shared blob space question of essentially amortizing costs while also enabling synchronous composability. It's a really tough problem. Like Ellie from Espresso and Mo from Polymer Labs were working on something called Circ, and an open standard for synchronous composability amongst rollups generally, but also base rollups in that category. So it's things like that are still, it's not super clear exactly what that's going to look like. I'm confident that it's doable and that we're going to have synchronous composability, but exactly what that looks like and what the trade-offs are still being fleshed out.
Yeah, and I mean, you guys are taking a big bet on the base rollup ecosystem because, like we're saying, it hasn't gotten to that point where it's a no-brainer yet. So, I mean, kudos to you for kind of pioneering this charge, leading this charge. And you know, you talked about pre-confs, which are an important prerequisite to this becoming a reality, because Ethereum right now has 12-second slot times, and if we were to do base rollups right now, they just wouldn't really feel fast enough to really like have any kind of usability resemblance.
Yeah,
to
base rollup that
existing
has
LTs.
12-second confirmations is like kind of useless. So,
Yeah.
absolute pre-requirement for it.
And so there's kind of these bottlenecks that are being put onto the base rollup ecosystem right now, and we're starting to overcome those. And so, like, as we kind of knock down these things, like you said, the shared blob space, like these pre-confs, what else is there to do before, in your vision, like what else is there to do before we kind of unchain the base rollup ecosystem and allow it to really thrive?
I think it will happen in steps. The first thing that has to happen is a decent adoption of validators participating in pre-comp protocols. So we need of the order of 20 to 30% of validators to participate, because how base rollups work is you essentially look at the look-ahead period, and you need at least one slot, one validator in the 32 block slot to be participating for the base rollups to sequence blocks in that epoch, essentially. So the more validators that come on board, the more the cheaper it gets, the more rollups you can support. You don't really want downtime. You don't want there to be 5 or 6 epochs where you can't sequence any blocks. That's just not going to work for users. So I think that's the biggest pillar. After that, then you can get pretty creative. So synchronous composability is where once we have pre-comps, we can experiment with synchronous composability, the different mechanisms, different shared sequencing models, and also then the L1, L2 execution. Synchronous composability with execution pre-comps is very, very, very difficult, but could be huge. This kind of idea that anyone with assets on ETH could interact with an L2 without ever their assets
Going to the L2, right?
Essentially.
Stays on the L1.
Yeah.
And what does that look like in practice? Like if there's a yield farm or an LP that's like significant kinds of yield, or like an arbitrage opportunity, we could kind of run that from the L1?
Yeah, look, you could definitely capitalize on arbitrage between the chains. I know some MEV guys, and their conclusion was it's likely to be just having that capital requirement of having capital on both chains is probably going to be fine. But I think it's more for users that want to use Ethereum and for it to feel like a single ecosystem.
Yes.
So you're on Ethereum and you're interacting with all these different rollups, but it feels like you're in one wallet. I think that's really where it's going to be, and you don't have to wait for like this 1 step, 2 step, 3 step. It's just going to be one transaction. You can look it up. It'll be like you'll have an exploded view of the different rollups that you touched within that like transaction stack.
Yeah.
Redstone modular oracles are available on 50 plus chains, trusted by over 100 clients, and over 6 billion in total value secured. Visit redstone.finance to find out more. Welcome aboard on our journey into the singularity. This is the endgame roadmap for Frax and Fraxtal, the new L2 out of the Frax ecosystem that is totally based on fractal scaling. Fraxtal is a modular L2 blockchain built by Frax with modular and fractal scaling in mind. Fractal scaling is based on the Mandelbrot set of fractal images, and it explains how L2s become L3s and the entire app chain lifecycle goes through its evolution. The Frax ecosystem is made of some of the top builders in the space and has stemmed from its OG days of the Frax stablecoin. It is now in the LST space, the LRT space, and this Fraxtal L2 joins the existing suite of Frax products, including Frax Swap and Frax Lend. You can see Frax Ferry, the bridge to go from any chain, Arbitrum, Optimism, or mainnet into the Fraxtal mainnet. Bridge your tokens and bring your Frax assets into the Fraxtal ecosystem. Join today to get the best out of Fraxtal. You are still early. Join today. Take part in our expedition into the singularity.
So, okay, so we've touched on quite a bit of the challenges, but it's a bull market. So, like, let's get excited about the innovation here.
Yeah.
Rise is pioneering this Gigagas concept where it's a new metric. Well, it's not a new metric, but it's a metric that is better representative compared to TPS. You've got all these different roll-up metrics, but right now it seems like this amount of gas per second in throughput is really basically enabling next on-chain innovation, right? And so Base is pushing right now, I think, like 15 mega gas per second, which is the biggest of all rollups today. But to get to 1 gigagas is about 66 times what Base is doing right now in terms of performance. What is this gigagas era, and what kind of new innovations for devs, for users do you expect? Welcome to the Gigagas era. Like what's going on here?
Yeah, man. I think like the next 18 months are going to be, excuse my French, but fucking wild. I'm so excited. Like where I think Vitalik tweeted this a little while about the S curve of innovation. That innovation usually has a curve where it slowly, then subtly, and then like kind of tapers off. And I think we're really at the knuckle that it's about to really accelerate in performance. We're going like it. Look how long it took us to go from 1 transactions per second to where we're at 15 mega gas, which is could be about 100 transactions per second. We're about to make a leap to 100,000 transactions per second in the next 6 to 12 months.
In terms of Ethereum broadly? Or just one roll-up?
For one roll-up, shared state, that's where we're headed. And so I mentioned TPS, and that's just because people understand TPS better, but gas is just broadly a better metric for measuring performance. Yeah. And the Gigagas era is kind of a way for the EVM community to muster behind a target. Like, I don't see, like, we don't own the Gigagas. Like, the Gigagas is everyone that's working towards this. Like, Reth has put a lot of work into this. We're using a lot of their code. Netherbine's killing it as well, working towards this. And we're a team really we're passionate about this. We know there's some really tough problems, and we need like more teams working on this, the better. But super excited for what it unlocks. The internet analogy gets overused, right?
Yeah.
But it's a good one.
Okay.
So if you look at 2005 era, we had no idea that unlocking bandwidth would lead to what we have today. And this is like YouTube, Instagram, Grab even, or Uber. So that's really what I'm excited about, that we don't actually know. I've got some ideas of what's going to be very successful, the kind of applications that are going to be awesome with this kind of bandwidth that we're reaching. But I'm more excited about like what people cook up with. Like if we're actually spending some time at Devcon this week asking builders is like, what would you build when you have 100x the performance? Like what comes to mind? Because people are going to get creative. People are going to build some cool shit.
Yeah.
So
So we were just talking to Anthony Sassano about what the Ethereum data availability capacity is right now in terms of blobs. We're like teetering on the edge of blob space currently in Ethereum. So Rise is a based rollup
Yep.
that is using a parallelized EVM, which we can get into, as well as Reth for the basically optimal performance, and then you have your Rise DB, which is also a highly performant database. So I'd like to touch on each of those from like the technical lens, but just to have an understanding for your data throughput needs, is Ethereum going to be able to suffice for that, or are you guys going to have to look to use alt DAs and either make a switch back or just stick to alt DAs in the immediate term to get this off the ground for the throughput that you need? And then if so, does that take away from any of the Ethereum alignment or composability or sovereignty properties that you get by being based?
Yeah, look, we will absolutely need to use alternate DA just because Ethereum doesn't have the bandwidth to support multiple Gigagas, which is where we're headed. So we will be using external DA. As for that means less fees to Ethereum. But like Susanna, I fall into the camp of propagating the usage of ETH is the goal. It's not about revenues. Revenues are bearish. Less
Yeah,
revenues.
ETH is a meme coin. It's
right.
a store of value.
That's right. Let's get this pet rock even bigger.
Okay.
But yeah, so the focusing kind of like on a loss leading strategy of getting usage of Ethereum in the ecosystem is really how I see what we're doing. There might be a world in the future where we come back and use Ethereum DA if that's the direction Ethereum goes for just really optimizing DA. But there's a lot of teams working on this. It's a tough challenge, and Ethereum's got to make the decision whether or not they want to be DA as a product in the future or they want to be money. Yeah.
And so are we anticipating that the DA like blobs are going to get maxed out because they're only still 80-90% full, right? So the thought process is that they'll get maxed out relatively quickly, and then
I think they are now.
They're getting
very
maxed
close.
out. Yeah, next week.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Next week.
I
Okay.
reckon. Yeah, like look at it takes one green kettle.
Yeah.
And the
Yeah,
blobs get
exactly.
maxed out.
Like
Yeah.
that's what I was saying with Sana. Like everyone was saying we have this oversupply of block space,
No.
but then we haven't even got any sort of speculative activity on L1 in what feels like forever. Gas has been under 10 Gwei. Like it doesn't take much,
Yeah, it takes one application that brings in another 30,000 retail users to play on a particular Web3 game or something like that, then all of a sudden we've got no blob space. So yeah, I think the gas fee markets are going to be my prediction there is that we're going to be in a price discovery mode for the gas fee markets.
So how does that affect the pre-comp services that are working with Rise, right?
Yeah.
And again, I want to touch on the EVM and the DB, but just real quick, if we're talking about this volatile gas market in the future, or at least a higher gas price for L1, I understand that the pre-comp services, doesn't really matter if it's it doesn't really matter if it's a steady rate regardless of the price, because they're just trying to price the block space accurately, but the volatility of the gas fees does kind of matter. So how does this like more speculative activity or potential more usage of blob space affect pre-comps, which then affects the base rollup UX?
Yeah, so it's similar to how gas is priced on like base and optimism today. That there isn't a real time matching between the fee a user is paying and the current gas rate. It's kind of this like you have a control loop where the user's fee slowly increases as the gas price increases, but the gas price on chain will always lead, and so you have a margin there to cover that difference essentially. So it's not like a user you have 100 transactions and they have to be a one-to-one mapping to the cost of the on-chain cost. It's more of an expected value over time. So these gateways that participate in pre-confirmations, gateways will be the party that essentially runs the sequencing for rollups. They will have to solve this problem and work on that kind of, it's going to be a fair market. They're going to work on what price they can specify to ensure that they cover their costs and make enough of a profit.
Got it. So because they're forward-looking in nature, like the base rollup design in terms of needing to have a validator commit to sequencing the base rollup in the next block, that property is enabled.
The forward-looking actually makes the pricing harder.
Okay.
Because you have less information because it's further away. If you're pricing it for this current block, it's a little bit easier. But we're actually less forward-looking in the based ecosystem than the current centralized sequencers, because the intent or where we're going is that we will be that the based ecosystem will be sequencing blocks at least once every epoch. So like that's 32 blocks, and right now I actually don't know the stats specifically on how frequently, say, base drops blobs down, but I suspect it's like a similar, if not less.
Got it. Okay, so Rise has built out a innovative parallel EVM. I was bull posting alt VMs on Twitter the other day, and you didn't like it. So give us the parallel EVM bull thesis for Rise.
Yeah.
What's the tech behind that?
It's not that I'll just talk to the alt VMs. It's not that I don't like alt VMs. I think ultimately it's good that people are innovating and trying to come up with VMs. But I think we're at a point where it's not the virtual machine that is going to limit the performance of a chain. It's actually the hot state. So at the end of the day, the market decides what state is valuable, and we've got to build systems to be able to sequence and process those blocks that need that hot state. So yeah, my thinking there is that the VMs aren't all that important. It's more about the adoption of those VMs and then tooling and the infrastructure they have. So that's why I was like, I gave a bit of pushback to that tweet. But regarding our stack, so you ran over it quickly. We've got a parallel EVM engine. This is an fully open source parallel EVM stack, Rust based. The intent is for this to upstream into Reth, which we're pretty excited about. And then we're building a new database to tackle the state access problem, because at a high level, the two key bottlenecks right now that DA, essentially you can use external DA, is no longer a bottleneck. The two bottlenecks are execution and state access. So on the execution front, that's where we've built this parallel EVM engine, which we essentially split up the blocks and execute them in parallel. This kind of tech was first introduced by Aptos not first, but they were the early pioneers of it with Block STM. So we're doing something similar. We've extended it to kind of build out a dependency graph before the input, and then we do something called lazy updates to make particular transactions more parallelizable. I won't dig into the weeds too much there, but ultimately it's looking like it's the fastest public parallel execution engine in the market. So you can run benchmarks and play around with it anytime you like. And then on the state access front, so this is just how fast you can read and write from state, whether it's sequential or parallel. And that's required both for the execution stage and also when you're calculating the Merkle route to wrap up the block and build the header. So we're working on a different tree structure, a more performant tree structure. I'm actually of the opinion that L2s will diverge from Ethereum and will likely use different tree structures, different databases. The priorities in Ethereum are very different to the priorities that are in L2. So I think it's better if the L2 does accelerate and push the envelope here. And
so you guys are using a Merkle tree design, if I'm not mistaken?
No, not Merkle tree. We're using versioned Merkle trees.
A versioned Merkle tree.
Yeah. So it's a slight adjustment on the tree structure, but it speeds things up quite a bit.
Okay. And so from my understanding, the state access and state bloat are the two biggest bottlenecks?
So
those are two separate things?
Yeah, so state access is separate to state bloat. State bloat is a massive problem. This is how fast the state grows.
Yeah.
And if you're doing 10 gigagas or 2 gigagas, and it's the type of transactions that add state for every transaction, it's going to blow out really, really quick. So it's we're working on execution, state access. The next frontier is state bloat and working out how to push forward on expiries and things like that. And there's an EF call called the roll call where they're trying to push in this direction and trying to innovate in the L2 landscape. But yeah, we absolutely need to solve state bloat as well.
Got it. Okay, so then broadly zooming out as we kind of wrap, what is your ideal ecosystem of Ethereum look like in terms of adoption? How do we rival Solana? How do we rival high TPS L1s and really just build this ecosystem of abundant block space? What does that look like for you? Is there changes on the L1? Is it base rollups? Is it these highly performant databases? Is it a combination, Reth, et cetera? What does this look like to you?
I think I'm of the opinion that we don't actually need too many changes on the L1 to make it happen. A faster L1 with fast finality is very beneficial, but I don't think it's absolutely mandatory. I think all the pieces are ready at the moment. That I'm a big believer in the fat rollup thesis, this idea that we can run very, very high performant rollups. Now, even with very, very high performant rollup, we're never going to be able to run a global computer that meets the demand of the globe. So that's where the like modular thesis comes in. So I anticipate a future where we have a handful of very, very high performant rollups that are essentially liquidity hubs for different verticals in the space. And then you have app chains that make sense to run on their own app chain, that don't need very, very strong composability just for simple interaction. So things like on-chain strategies, money Legos, that kind of thing needs to share the state. Like you can't run a Vault protocol on an app chain. It's just not going to work. But you could want to run a Web3 game that has interoperability with a chain that has like high liquidity. So that's how I see things playing out. Kind of this, you have like a long tail in the sense of activity, some very high performant chains next to a long tail of app chains. And the key that will unlock that and for us to actually compete against, well, not actually compete, but like do really well against Solana is making it feel like a cohesive ecosystem. So I think that's the second unlock, is solving interoperability. Honestly, we've got to, like, the standards around RPC interfaces is just very hard to work with. So I think there's going to be people have to be ambitious about breaking things to make this work properly. Otherwise, we're not going to progress.
Move fast, break things, launch base rollups. Last thing, what's the Rise timeline currently?
Yeah, so we've got internal testnet that's live. We're pretty stoked. We hit 2 Gigagas on, like, sustained 2 Gigagas on our internal testnet last week. We will have a public testnet in the coming months. But right now, if there's any builders that want to come play around, test things out, we can let them in. We're going to be announcing, by the time this releases, we might have already announced it, but we're announcing our builder program. It's called Rice Club. So yeah, we're really excited to onboard builders. Rice Club is essentially an incubator. We're going to be onboarding builders, helping them with investment, helping them build out products. Like, our team all comes from the application domain, and our current tagline is, "We fucked up so you don't have to." We know what it's like to make mistakes, particularly in DeFi. Like, I've been in a war room when my protocol had a vulnerability of $50 million. Like, we know what steps to make to make good decisions, so that the builders in the program don't have to. But yeah, helping them out. We want to help them with investment, get this product to market, lots of opportunities for launch partners, and then mainnet is sometime next year.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, thanks, Sam. Thanks so much for coming out into the slums of Thailand.
No, this is awesome. Thanks a lot, fellas. Absolute pleasure.